the most prolific killer in European history. Yet behind the stories of torture and bloodbaths lies another truth: a debt-ridden crown, a political purge, and a woman erased by the same system that created her. Was she a murderer or a myth crafted to destroy a name too powerful to ignore? If stories like this unsettles you, like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to The Shadow Book for more true stories buried in the dark corners of history. The records of Báthory estate describe the birth of a daughter to the Bathory family as an event of local significance, a noble addition to a dynasty that already held command over more than 40 villages across Transylvania. The midwives wrote of a healthy child, though within years the household physician noted convulsive fainting and unexplained fits of trembling. What the records omit is how early her family's household taught the meaning of obedience. Her father, Baron George Bathory, served as governor under the Prince of Transylvania, administering both land and law. The castle's halls were lined with banners of the dragon and cross, symbols of lineage older than the kingdom itself. Beneath them stood servants, guards, and a rotating line of petitioners from the lower estates. The family's power was measured in punishments. Disputes were settled in the courtyard, debts erased with lashes, shame made public. For a child, this formed a daily education in hierarchy. Witnesses later recalled that the young Elizabeth was quiet, observant with a fixed gaze. During her early attacks, what physicians of the era called the falling sickness, her attendants pressed a cold handkerchief steeped in vinegar to her temple, murmuring prayers while she convulsed. Afterwards, she was kept apart, instructed that her weakness was to remain unseen. In the Bathory household, appearances were discipline. Compassion was reserved for bloodlines, not bodies. The first written account of her witnessing an execution appears in the estate's 1566 record. The Lady Elizabeth was present among the household during the public hanging of a thief by permission of her uncle. She was 6 years old. The thief, a farmhand accused of stealing horse, stood on the gallows platform under a sky of early frost. Elizabeth watched from behind her governess, her embroidered shoes sinking into the mud as the crowd murmured. When the man dropped, she did not flinch. In noble circles of 16th-century Transylvania, such exposure was considered instruction, a demonstration that order required spectacle. A lord's justice was not questioned, it was displayed. Children of rank were taught that mercy disrupted hierarchy. For Elizabeth, the lesson became moral architecture. Pain meant power, silence meant control. Within family correspondence, her governess is described as a woman of sharp tongue and stricter faith. She enforced the household's Calvinist codes with fasting and correction. One letter from a visiting tutor mentions the child's peculiar calm during reprimands. She receives correction as one studies it, without tears, without confession. Discipline became a form of performance, both expected and rewarded. That winter, an outbreak of fever among the servants reduced the household staff. Elizabeth's mother ordered the sick isolated in the lower courtyard until burial. The young girl was forbidden to enter, but was seen watching from a high window. The bodies were taken away on carts, shrouded in coarse linen, leaving streaks of mud along the path. From this height, death appeared efficient, organized, not tragedy, but management. Her governess's final remark in the surviving letters would later echo through every accusation brought against the woman she became. Remember, child, mercy is a luxury for those who can afford it. That night, the castle scribe noted that the girl refused supper. Instead, she stood at the window until the last torch in the courtyard was extinguished, watching the executioner rinse his blade one final time, her earliest recorded memory of cleanliness after killing. In 1573, Elizabeth Bathory, aged 13, was formally betrothed to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, heir to another of Hungary's powerful lineages. The agreement was not written in affection, but in legal clauses, two dynasties reinforcing one another through land, debt, and loyalty. The contract secured territories in western Hungary, combining their estates into one of the largest holdings in the kingdoms. The ceremony was noted by the local magistrate as befitting two pillars of the realm. Dowry inventories listed linens, silver utensils, livestock, 16 maidservants, 4 cooks, 2 stableboys. Her role was to unite, not to decide. The joining of houses was described as a tactical alignment, a domestic alliance serving the Hungarian crown against Ottoman encroachment. Ferenc Nadasdy, 5 years her senior, had been raised in a barracks near Vienna. Known among soldiers as the Black Knight of Hungary, his reputation rested on calculated brutality against Ottoman captives. He returned home between campaigns to inspect his estates and his new wife. Witnesses later described him as disciplined, devout, and exacting. His worldview saw obedience and punishment as indistinguishable. It was under him that Elizabeth learned the function of cruelty as order. Sarvar Castle, where they settled, reflected this dual inheritance, part fortress, part household. The daily routine was divided between prayer, correspondence, and discipline. Offences among the servants were categorized by type: theft, idleness, disobedience. Nadasdy believed that visible punishment maintained loyalty. His men practiced it on the training field. His wife observed it within the halls. He instructed her in the same logic. Letters exchanged between noble families during this period praised the young countess for her composure. "She bears correction with dignity," one relative wrote. The household chaplain recorded that she keeps accounts with an uncommon severity for her age. In public, this appeared as virtue. In private, it was apprenticeship. Among the artifacts preserved from her early years at Sarvar is a small whip, leather braided with wire, catalogued later among the estate's possessions. It is uncertain whether it belonged to her or to her husband, but in her household, the difference mattered little. Violence was not rebellion, it was responsibility. When Nadasdy departed on campaign, he left her in command of the castle's operations. His letters to her are blunt. Keep the servants in order, punish swiftly, delay breeds defiance. She obeyed, recording each infraction in the household log. It was the first time she exercised authority unobserved. The cruelty that once unsettled her became methodical, a duty inherited, not invented. At 16, she presided over her first execution of a servant accused of theft. The body was removed before dawn. No official record names the victim. Her steward noted only that discipline was restored. Elizabeth's reaction, if any, went unrecorded. The marriage was considered prosperous, a union of two disciplined houses. The correspondence of the time refers to her as the Count's mirror, a wife who reflected his strength and authority. Her education was now complete. On the night before Nadasdy's return to the front, he left a wedding gift on her dressing table, a pair of riding gloves lined inside with small metal claws. A note in his handwriting read, "Now you can correct mistakes without words." When the candles burned low, she tried them on. The fit was perfect. Between 1574 and 1600, Sarvar Castle functioned as both home and institution, a fortress that disciplined its inhabitants with the same precision it defended its borders. The Bathory Nadasdy household followed strict codes copied from military orders. Each servant's duty was listed in ledgers. Absences and infractions were recorded in ink. The castle's staff, numbering over 100, lived under unbroken supervision. For those within the castle, the pattern was unmistakable. Servants dismissed after minor errors were never seen again. The cellars were locked at dusk. Those ordered below did not return before morning. Fear kept the remaining staff obedient. Even the steward's tone in the household ledger changed. Fewer names, fewer details, more blank spaces. The omissions themselves became testimony. By 1609, the rumors reached the monasteries that managed royal correspondence. A Franciscan friar wrote to his superior describing a growing unease among the faithful near the widowess lands. His letter was folded and sealed but never sent. The abbot, a man indebted to noble patrons, burned it that same evening. To accuse a countess without proof risked ruin. The system that should have contained her instead absorbed her. Power disguised excess as authority, cruelty as custom. To the crown, her estates provided revenue and stability. To her relatives, her silence kept inheritance intact. No one above her rank would intervene, and no one below it dared. The violence, now common knowledge, was tolerated through mutual benefit. The first attempt to reach the capital came from a parish messenger named Miklos Toth, who carried signed petitions from 3 villages to Bratislava. He was last seen crossing the Varg River before nightfall. His horse returned 2 days later, rein snapped, saddle empty. The petitions were never found. A month later, a sealed letter arrived from Vienna, bearing the crest of the royal chancellery. Its language was courteous but unmistakable. "The king has heard of your excesses. Be cautious whom you invite next." The steward read it aloud in the great hall. The countess listened without reaction. When he finished, she took the letter, folded it once, and placed it into the fire. "If they hear of me," she said quietly, "let them also hear that I am not afraid." Outside, the smoke from the castle kitchen rose above an empty road, the only visible sign that life continued inside. By 1610, the corridors of Čachtice castle no longer held only servants. The widow countess had begun receiving the daughters of minor nobles, girls sent to refine their manners, to learn needlework, etiquette, and speech suitable for marriage. It was a common arrangement among the gentry. A few months of household tutelage under a woman of rank was considered an advantage, a way to polish reputation. Parents trusted the Bathory name. Her lineage offered protection and promise. The first arrivals were treated well. They wrote home about fine meals, music, and the countess's lessons on posture and conversation. But those letters stopped within weeks. Others replaced them, new girls from distant families, each delivered by carriage, each greeted formally by servants who did not meet their eyes. In the castle records they were listed simply as visitors, their durations of stay never noted. The class distinction that had shielded Elizabeth for decades began to erode. Servants could vanish without consequence, but the daughters of nobility carried influence beyond the walls. Their absence invited questions. A tutor employed by one visiting family returned early, claiming illness. Weeks later, he confided to a priest that one of his pupils had been confined after offending the countess. A broken comb mistaken for defiance. He described hearing screams from the lower wing and being told they were disciplinary recitations. The priest wrote the account in his journal but did not send it to the diocese. Accusations against nobility required witnesses of equal rank. None were willing to speak. Feudal law drew its lines clearly. The life of a serf belonged to the landowner, but the life of a noble, however minor, belonged to the crown. Elizabeth had crossed into forbidden territory. The rumor that one of these pupils, a young girl from the Szilágyi family, had died during her stay reached the local magistrate. The death was reported as illness, accompanied by a sealed letter of condolence and the return of the girl's belongings. But when the coffin arrived at her family estate near Trenxen, the father noticed bruising along the arms, visible even beneath the burial shroud. The family demanded inquiry. Their petition to the county court was measured but firm. "We request the truth concerning our daughter's education and her untimely death." It was the first time the crown received complaint not from peasants or clergy, but from its own kin. The court could no longer ignore it. Meanwhile, within Čachtice, fear turned inward. Servants began destroying records, hiding tools and erasing names from rosters. Elizabeth sensed the change. Her correspondence grew sharper, accusing her staff of disloyalty. "Weakness," she wrote, "invites punishment from higher places. We shall meet it with discipline." Her authority, once absolute, had become defense. A courier from Vienna arrived days later with orders for a preliminary review by the Palatine. He was received politely, fed, and dismissed before sunset. He never saw the interior rooms where the girls had lived. That evening, the steward found her in the chapel, reading aloud from the Psalms. On the altar beside her lay a torn silk ribbon, stained dark at one edge. When he asked what should be done with it, she said only, "Burn it before morning." Weeks later, the coffin of the Szilágyi girl was officially reopened in the presence of witnesses. The record describes what they found in cautious Latin. Ecchymosis, evident along shoulders and wrists, inconsistent with sickness. Her father, upon seeing the marks, ordered the coffin sealed again. "Let her rest," he said, "for none of us will." It was the first visible fracture in Elizabeth's protection, the moment her name, once synonymous with power, began to circulate in whispers of accusation. The violence that had secured her obedience now summoned the law itself to her door. In March 1610, the silence surrounding Čachtice broke at last. King Matthias II issued a royal decree authorizing Palatine Gheorghe Thurzo to investigate the questionable deaths and vanishings within the widow Bathory's domain. The order was drafted by the Royal Chancellery in Vienna, a document written as justice but motivated by arithmetic. The Crown owed Elizabeth Bathory a considerable debt from wartime loans once extended by her late husband. The inquiry, if proven true, would erase that obligation. The machinery of procedure began immediately. Thurzo, a cautious nobleman with loyalty to the king and ties to the Bathory family, assembled a commission of priests, notaries, and guards. Their task was to collect testimony, inspect the castle, and document every word in duplicate. The first depositions came from villagers, shepherds, and dismissed servants. The questions were simple. Who entered the castle? Who returned? The answers filled pages. Witnesses spoke of girls summoned under pretext of service, of screams heard beyond the walls, of wagons leaving the grounds at dawn. The statements were written in Latin, formal and distant, each line concluding with the phrase depositione sua affirmavit. He confirmed his statement. Some witnesses described seeing injuries, others only hearing rumors. Precision mattered less than pattern. Each new account strengthened the conclusion already desired. As the inquiry widened, so did the number of testimonies. By midsummer, more than 200 depositions had been recorded. The descriptions grew consistent. Confinement, starvation, beatings, deaths unburied. The investigators began exhuming graves around the orchard and stables. What they found was recorded in Thurzo's own hand, remains in number and state, unfit for recognition. The phrase would later appear in the official report to the Crown. Inside the castle, servants were separated and questioned. The interrogations followed the accepted method of the time, persuasion by exhaustion, followed by the application of flame and cord. Under torture, confessions came quickly. Names were given, stories aligned, and guilt distributed downward. Each admission confirmed the Countess's culpability. Each signature absolved the Crown of delay. Thurzo's men recorded every object they found: clothing, instruments, stains on walls. The inventory reads like a ledger of decay: iron tongs, wooden restraints, chains coiled beside half-eaten bread and water jugs. These items were catalogued as evidence, sealed, and transported under guard. The precision of bureaucracy replaced the uncertainty of rumor. From the start, the inquiry was political theatre as much as justice. The king's advisers noted that a conviction would release him from repayment of the Nadasti debts, while securing favor with nobles wary of a woman commanding such property. Thurzo's letters to Vienna betray caution. He recommended containment rather than execution, a solution that would silence scandal without challenging lineage. The testimonies continued through autumn, each one more certain than the last. Peasants named other peasants, servants named each other, all under the assurance of mercy. The truth, if it existed, dissolved into repetition. The royal court accepted the findings without inspection. By December, the final document was ready: Report on the misdeeds of the widow Bathory. Its pages carried the royal watermark and the signature of Matthias II himself. The warrant for arrest bore his seal in red wax, already drying as copies were dispatched to the counties of Trenčín and Nitra. That night, in the servants' quarters of Čachtice, whispers spread faster than light could reach the corridors. The steward ordered candles extinguished, fearing ears in the walls. Someone claimed to have seen soldiers on the road, their torches moving like slow embers through the fog. In the kitchen, two maids hid beneath the table, whispering prayers. One asked the other what would happen when the king's men arrived. The answer came from a voice at the doorway, the oldest servant holding the keys to the cellar. "They are already here," she said. Nightfall, December 29, 1610. The temperature near Čachtice dropped below freezing, and the roads were covered in a film of ice. Around midnight, torches began appearing along the ridge, slow, deliberate, and coordinated. Palatine Gheorghe Thurzo and his escort of soldiers approached the castle in silence. Their orders, signed by King Matthias II, authorized not a trial, but an immediate arrest. The document described the operation as inspection of royal interest. Inside the fortress, no one had been warned. The outer guards were overcome without resistance. their weapons collected and catalogued on the spot. Witness accounts from the following week describe the sound of boots and no shouting. The air smelled of iron and cold oil as the soldiers forced open the inner gates. The first to wake was the steward, who had served the household for 2 decades. When he opened the courtyard door, the torchlight caught his face, pale, uncomprehending. Thurzo's men pushed past him, proceeding toward the main hall. In the upper chambers, Elizabeth Bathory was found seated by the fire, writing. The official report records that she neither screamed nor pleaded. She asked only, "Has the king sent word of forgiveness or accusation?" Thurzo replied, "Both." The search began immediately. Servants were confined to the hall under guard while scribes followed the investigators through each room. Doors were unsealed, chests opened, ledgers examined. In the lower cellars, soldiers discovered evidence that confirmed the depositions collected over the year. 2 living captives, one barely conscious, the other unable to stand. Several bodies in varying states of decay, iron restraints bolted into the stone walls. The stench, one report noted, was sufficient to still the bravest stomach. Every discovery was recorded with precision. The scribes documented each item: clothing torn and stiff with blood, a wooden chair with leather straps, a small whip with wire ends. The inventory listed these under the heading Implements of Correction. For the monarchy, this list would later serve as proof enough, a visible ledger of guilt. Elizabeth did not attempt denial. When Thurzo read the charges aloud, she listened without interruption. "You are accused," he said, "of the unlawful death of persons entrusted to your care." She answered, "Persons entrusted are not always deserving." The soldiers waited for an order to bind her, but Thurzo refused, citing noble privilege. "She shall remain in her rooms," he said. "Let the stones keep her." Outside, the castle yard filled with soldiers and carts prepared for confiscation. The snow was trampled into grey slush. The iron gate groaned under frost as it was sealed. The steward, trembling, handed over the household keys. He later testified that she looked directly at him and said, "If I were a man, they would call it justice." At dawn, Thurzo began his final inspection of the grounds. From the parapet, he wrote a short note to the king. "The lady is contained, the evidence abundant." His handwriting was neat, precise, without ornament. That evening, masons arrived under his command. They were ordered to reinforce her chambers, 3 rooms in the northern tower overlooking the courtyard. Stone and mortar were carried in through narrow passages. By morning, the windows were sealed, and the doors walled halfway up, leaving a small opening for food and air. The official account ends there. The report filed in Pressburg closes with a single line: "The Lady Elizabeth is to remain enclosed at Čachtice until further royal decision." In the village below, people gathered outside the chapel to hear the news. Some crossed themselves. Others whispered that it was too late, that too many had been buried to name. Inside the tower, Elizabeth sat by the remaining light from her hearth. She said nothing as the final stones were set, and when the mason wiped his hands of mortar, she turned her head slightly as if listening. The sound that followed, a brick pressed into place, was not loud, but final. In the town of Bitcha, makeshift gallows were erected outside the courthouse. The trials of Elizabeth Bathory's servants began at sunrise and concluded before evening. The accused were 4 in number: Ilona Jo Dorotia Sentes, Janos Uvari, and Katarina Benica. All were charged with assisting in the unlawful imprisonment, torture, and killing of young women in the service of the countess. Their mistress, though named repeatedly, was not present. The proceedings followed the accepted legal form of the kingdom. A panel of judges presided under royal authority, and the Palatine himself attended to ensure the appearance of legitimacy. Witnesses were summoned from nearby parishes. Their testimonies were familiar. They had heard screams, seen injuries, or knew someone who vanished. Few had seen the countess directly, but all had seen her servants act on her orders. The statements, taken under oath, filled 34 pages of the court record, written neatly, each signed by the clerk and sealed with red wax. The interrogations of the servants were conducted with persuasion. Each confession was preceded by a request for divine forgiveness, followed by the formal question of guilt. Torture instruments, laid out on a wooden table, reminded the accused of what silence cost. The servants confirmed the charges. They claimed to have followed commands, administered punishment, and disposed of bodies. Whether they sought mercy or truth no longer mattered. Their words completed the case the Crown required. In the official summary, Palatine Thurzo wrote, "The guilt of the servants is manifest, the lady's knowledge presumed." The verdict carried precision, enough to condemn the instruments, not the hand that wielded them. By punishing those beneath her, the court preserved the hierarchy that had made her crimes possible. The executions were swift. 2 were burned, 1 decapitated, the youngest imprisoned for life. The town's records marked the day as cold and clear. The executioner's footprints, pressed into the snow, led to the scaffold and back, but nowhere beyond. Within weeks of the trial, King Matthias II confirmed a series of property transfers. Her dowry estates passed to her children and their spouses, under conditions of loyalty to the crown. The royal debt owed to the Nardesti family was quietly cancelled on the grounds of moral forfeiture. The confiscated goods from Čachtice, furniture, silver and tapestries, were distributed among noble households aligned with the court. The machinery of justice had completed its function. The scandal neutralized, the estate stabilized, the treasury restored. No sentence was ever issued against Elizabeth herself. The rationale preserved in the royal archive stated that her lineage and station render formal judgment unnecessary. To execute her publicly would have meant acknowledging that nobility itself was not immune to cruelty, a revelation too dangerous for a kingdom held together by deference. Inside the sealed chambers of Čachtice, Elizabeth remained confined. Food was delivered through a small opening. The priest assigned to her reported that she prayed irregularly, spoke little, and refused confession. One evening he claimed to have received from her a folded scrap of parchment, bearing a single line, "The walls are cleaner than the hands that built them." The document never entered the official archive. The priest burned it, explaining later that words of bitterness do not serve salvation. Outside, the castle walls stood unchanged, their stone newly mortared, the air heavy with lime and smoke. In the royal capital, rumors of her death began circulating even before her pulse had slowed. Stories of blood, youth and madness replacing the tedious record of politics. The myth had begun, and the truth was already buried beneath it. The northern tower of Čachtice Castle remained sealed. The parish register of August 21st records the death of Lady Elizabeth, widow of the late Count Nardesti. No cause is written. Her servants noted only that she was found lying on her side near the wall, one hand still resting on the stone. A mason removed 2 bricks to verify her death. Witnesses confirmed it. The entry closes with the phrase, "Deo gratias," thanks be to God. Burial followed quietly. Her family, fearing desecration, arranged for her remains to be moved under cover of darkness. The original gravesite, believed to be the castle chapel, was left unmarked. Within a month, official correspondence between the Palatine and the Crown recorded that the widow's confinement has concluded. The estate passed intact to her heirs. The kingdom gained stability. The woman, erased from life, entered administrative memory. For decades, Čachtice Castle stood in gradual decay. The once busy courtyards emptied, stonework cracked, vines overtook the gatehouse. Travelers passing through the region heard conflicting accounts. Some said the lady had murdered hundreds, others said she had been framed by jealous kin. No official record contradicted either view. In silence, the story grew. By the mid-17th century, her name reappeared in ecclesiastical discussions about sin and punishment. Priests cited her case as an example of unrepentant pride in women of rank. None had seen the documents. They relied on rumor passed through sermons. A pattern emerged, moral instruction replacing fact. The details hardened into symbol, cruelty as female ambition, power as corruption. In 1744, a Jesuit historian named Laszlo Turoczi published a volume on Hungarian history. One chapter bore the title, "The Blood Countess." He claimed that Elizabeth Bathory had bathed in the blood of virgins to preserve her youth. His sources were unspecified, his tone authoritative. The image endured. The few printed pamphlets followed. decorated with crude woodcuts showing a woman surrounded by basins and knives. The story spread across Europe, detached from record, amplified by fascination with female monstrosity. The transformation served multiple purposes. For the Church, she became a cautionary emblem against vanity and female power. For the Crown, she remained a reminder that rebellion, even by lineage, ended in ruin. For common readers, she was spectacle. The historical widow confined by politics was replaced by an immortal predator, her sins exaggerated until they eclipsed her existence. By the 18th century, Čachtice had become a site of curiosity. Travelers carved initials into the stone of her tower. Guides told rehearsed stories of blood rituals and witchcraft. The town erected no monument, only a wooden post marking the supposed place of her death. In parish archives, the original documents decayed, their ink faded by damp air. Each retelling moved further from the woman who once ruled there. Modern scholars who later examined the surviving records noted the omissions: testimony extracted under torture, witnesses paid in coin or pardon, a royal debt erased through condemnation. They saw a case less about cruelty than about power, a mirror reflecting the kingdom's need for purity at any cost. Yet the legend had long outlived correction. In the final inventory of Čachtice, compiled in 1750, one entry remains curious: a door of stone sealed without name. No inscription, no plaque, no mark of guilt or innocence, just silence. Centuries later, artists, novelists, and filmmakers would return to that sealed door, carving into it what history never proved. In their versions, she became immortal, her crimes redrawn as myth, her confinement forgotten. The woman they had silenced became the monster they needed. The camera lingers on the empty chamber. A voice, dry and measured, recites the last line copied from the tower ledger: "Here ends her mercy." No verified portrait survives.